When I was young, I would often spend the summers in upstate New York at my grandma's house, where she worked full time in a glove factory. Every afternoon, my brother and I would ride our bikes to the factory so she didn't have to walk home alone. We waited for her to come out of this factory, and when she did, we would see all the new burns on her hands and arms from making gloves that day. Even though her arms were covered with burns, she never complained. She was just happy to have a steady job. I remember feeling so bad for her, but the conditions she faced was absolutely nothing compared to what the factory workers in Europe and America had to endure during the Industrial Revolution. During the late 1700s and into the 1800s, developments led to new and easier ways to produce goods. These new form of machines and power completely changed the economic and social landscape of the time, especially in Europe and North America, and led to the adoption of the factory system. Before this, most things were made by hand, by skilled craftsmen. Now they had a harder time making a living, especially those who lived in the countryside. They had to move to bigger towns and cities to find work in these newly formed factories that were making goods for a much cheaper rate. As these people moved into the cities to take these new factory jobs, they were faced with a harsh reality. Operating these machines oftentimes didn't require a lot of skill, so these jobs were very low paying, and the workers faced terrible working conditions. This was the time before labor laws, OSHA, and unions. Factory owners took advantage of the workers any way they could. A typical work week consisted of 14 to 16-hour workdays, 6 days a week. That's equivalent to more than 2 full-time jobs these days. Men, women, and even small children worked in the factories. The average starting age of a child factory worker during this period was around 8. You heard me right, 8. And some started as early as 4 and 5 years old. Children didn't just work in the factories, they also worked in the coal mines. Coal was needed for the steam power that powered all these new machines in the factories. Women and children were typically paid half the wages of a man. Long hours and low pay weren't the only issues in these factories. Safety hazards were everywhere. Machines didn't have proper safety covers, and injuries were commonplace. Machines oftentimes didn't work properly, which increased the risk of injury and would also catch fire at times. If a worker did get injured, their wages would stop immediately. No medical assistance would be given. Injured workers usually lost their jobs and did not get any compensation. Factories were dusty, dirty, and dark. Most factories were dimly lit. Since the machines ran on steam from fires, there was smoke everywhere, and there was very little ventilation. Many people ended up with eye issues or lung disease. Even though the workers worked up to 16 hours a day, they usually only received 1 break a day, even though they had to keep up with the relentless pace of the machines, under the close supervision of cruel and harsh managers. Here's an example of a diary entry from a 9-year-old girl who worked as a seamstress in a factory during the Industrial Revolution.
Today was going to be another tiring day as usual. I woke up at 4 a.m. to go to work at the factory. My sister Heather and I walked there. We were running late. I didn't get to eat breakfast. I haven't in a very long time. Once I got to work, I started to work on the dress that I had started yesterday. Someone was staring at me. It was the man in the uniform. He kept yelling at me because I was looking out the window. My sister whispered for me to quit it, because we really need the money. That man beat me with a stick for not working. My punishment was unfair. I didn't get my usual half-hour lunch break. He made me work straight through it. My stomach growled. My hands and back ached. I worked long and hard until Heather told me it was time to leave. We had been dismissed. Our shift was done. It's 6 p.m. My days are so terribly long. I used to only work 10 hours a day. Since Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, I work 14 hours a day with only 2 short breaks, 1 for lunch and 1 for supper. Some days, I have no breaks.
Since unemployment was high during this period, workers were very replaceable and had very little leverage. As we got into the late 1800s and early 1900s, the labor movement picked up more steam, no pun intended, and with the formation of more and more unions, the workers started to gain some power, but it was a long, hard fight. It wasn't until 1938 until the U.S. federal government passed a law that set a minimum working age of 16 to work in factories. I grew up poor, so I'm glad I didn't grow up during the Industrial Revolution. As always, Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Please subscribe for more historical videos. Take care.